Oh, there we go. Okay, now it's working. Sorry. We'll start again very quickly. Hi, welcome to the That's Old School podcast, episode 1. The pilot went really, really well last week. Thank you everyone so much for the support. It was amazing to see a lot of you get engaged. I'm Robbie, and I am joined by...
Hi, I'm Ash. I am a content developer for Old School RuneScape.
I promise you this isn't the second time we're doing this, by the way. I didn't accidentally hit the wrong button and confuse myself majoritively easily, but there we go. Apologies to Ash for having to do this again. So we're looking at the year 2016 for updates, and we're looking at the 2014 for updates, and we're looking at the kind of year-by-year development and progression of the game, I guess, since its release back in 2013. If we talk about 2013 quickly first, obviously there was a lot of stuff that happened that year, and the game itself was released January 22nd. What was that like for you guys in the studio with a smaller dev team, barely passing the, well, not even passing the poll, but getting the dev team anyway, thankfully?
So there'd been talk about having an old version of RuneScape for a while at this point. Obviously, we knew some players were interested, and we knew some staff were interested. I myself had been, drafted a random email to Mod Pips, who was a senior designer in those days, and saying, "Hey, I hear we might do one of these. If we do, I'd love to be on it as a dev and uploader for it. I think I'd be useful for it. Pretty please, let me know if you want one." He said he'd get in touch if we went ahead with the project, and sometime later, I'm at my desk thinking, it's been a while, I haven't heard anything, but they're still making noise about that project. I'll email another manager and tell him I want to, and tell this guy I want to be on it as well. So I start emailing my line manager saying, "Hey, I hear we might be going ahead with this project. Can I be on it, please?" But then he rocks up on my desk while I'm typing and says, "Ash, we're thinking of going ahead with this old version of RuneScape, and I want to know, would you mind if we put you on it?" I said, "Well, here's half an email begging to be on it, so clearly I don't mind too much." I didn't bother sending the email, he'd got the idea. And I got put on it. There were initially 4 of us as officially on it, like Mod Nexus as another developer, and me as another developer, Mod Reach overseeing the testing, and well, actually, that was it. At this stage, we didn't have community support, so Matt Kay didn't join us until a bit later. Mostly, it was a matter of, okay, delve through all the records we've got of bugs we fixed after 2007 to see what we want to fix in this build before it goes out. Bearing in mind that it has been promised to the players it will go out on that date. In mid-February, it will go out on that date. It's a Friday. If we end up staying till midnight, that's the date it's going out. Raise eyebrows, cancel evening plans and other commitments, because we've been told if it's midnight, it's still going out that day. Fine. They weren't that good evening plans, but I still prefer someone to say please when they ask for that kind of thing. And just see what we can get fixed. Worked out there's probably going to be a bottleneck on Tutorial Island, see what we can do about the doors. We can't edit the map because we have no tool that could work in the map format of that era. So what can we do to edit the map without needing to change the map file with just dynamically spawning or removing things as players walk into an area? Create Skippy to get people off the island faster. That seemed like a good idea for it. Can't map him down. Got to write some code that automatically spawns him when you go into areas where he'd be standing. Nobody really had a whole lot of long-term vision. It was very much players will come in, get a big nostalgia hit, quite a lot of them by the look of the petition, but it was not expected that they'd want to stay the long term because, well, with the best will in the world, it was never expected we'd be giving a lot of updates. It hadn't fit the threshold for getting a dedicated team doing updates. And while, nostalgia is a jolly real thing on the internet, the number of people expected to stay, 6 months later, 9 months later, wasn't expected to be that significant. And we kind of expected we'd be moved back to the main RuneScape, as it was then called. In fact, Modreach, being quite a full-sided chap, approached his line manager and said, I'd like a signed letter stating that when the old version of the game is gone again, he won't be made redundant. He'll be transferred back to work on the modern RuneScape. And he got that. Of course, he's no longer with us, so it's probably not applicable anymore. But
no, I don't think it covers. I don't think it would cover him for what happened after that. No, really, would it?
Would. Besides, the manager who signed it is also long gone. I asked for a similar one, and they said, and my manager said, "Oh, you don't need that." So I'd like it. Oh, you don't need that. So I never got it. Anywho, well, I'm still here, and so is old school RuneScape. That's nice.
I guess at the time it was quite reasonable to think it wouldn't be a longevitable success, because the mold didn't. There wasn't really a mold for a game to be re-released from 6 years ago at that point to have any sort of success. There was no archetype for it really. The only ones that were around were sort of EVE Online and also WoW to an extent, that had been around for long enough where people, but they were being updated. It wasn't like they were a static game, so there wasn't really anything to say it would work.
We didn't know we'd be updated. We didn't know how much we'd be updated. We really didn't know what to expect. And sure, we didn't assume it was going to be a significant new revenue stream for the studio for months or years to come. That was something we discovered when we got going. And in a sense, that's quite nice. Old School stayed because its players wanted it to, not because anybody had a business plan necessarily. I mean, to be sure, they weren't stupid. They knew this could go well. They decided it was worth having the initial 4 of us. Once the launch rush was over, me and Mod Nexus as developers, Reach as QA, and they decided to have an embedded community person, Mod Matt K, working with us so that he could do community engagement and talk to us about what updates players wanted. And it would be a tiny little team within the studio doing whatever we could with the resources available to us, which weren't very many. We couldn't edit models, couldn't edit the map, couldn't edit interfaces. I came up with ways of making new interfaces without a tool for editing interfaces at all. And while it's a dirty hack, we ship content with it. And, I don't feel bad about doing a dirty piece of code that let us actually ship something rather than nothing, given that if I'd said, no, we're going to wait and do it properly, that will be, well, maybe in 5 months we'll have a tool that will let us do this, or maybe we won't. It's rather hard to predict whether we'll get these things or not. I don't think we'd have ever got anywhere if I took that.
It would have definitely been a real shame, and I think possibly as well it would have not, the longevity of the game aside, I mean, you were against time at that point in your eyes as a company, I assume, because you were obviously wanting it to be a success because you all loved working on it, but you also knew people wouldn't stick around if there was issues.
I did clock up some funky hours during the course of 2013. Now, on a personal note, there's something there that helped a little, which is that in the late summer 2013, I broke up with a girlfriend who was living in my house, and we were on civil terms and occasionally cooked dinner for each other and even had a dinner party together one time, to the alarm of the guests we invited for it. I suddenly felt that staying in the office on a lot of evenings would be a really smart move.
Timing is always an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, I can definitely understand that one from a personal level as well. Actually, for when I was working in a supermarket, it was a similar thing with a girl I was going out with at the time. It ended, and then suddenly I was doing a lot more overtime, and it was interesting how they both sort of collided. That's the word.
Yeah, well, no regrets on any
Yeah.
of it.
But
It
it's
meant that suddenly I was 3 in the evenings because when she was actually my girlfriend, it made sense to spend time with her. And when she was living in my house as my ex-girlfriend, it made sense to spend time in the office.
makes sense. So okay, so that's I guess a bit about 2013. We was there anything else from that year that's notable? Would you say?
No, but it was by the middle of 2013, the big nostalgia rush had pretty much ebbed, and numbers were drifting down over time, and players were wanting to know whether Jagex was going to commit to this thing staying or not, because they'd keep playing if they could be assured that the product would still be there 6 months to a year later. Otherwise, they wouldn't put their time into it, because why would they? Their achievements would be wiped if we turned it off again. So getting that kind of certainty was problematic. We'd been promised that the subscription would not change for the first 6 months. It would not be made higher than RuneScape 3 subscription. Remember, of course, subscription got you RuneScape, the RuneScape 3 as we now know it. And there was talk about how you can play old school for no extra cost on top of your subscription. But, naturally players see no extra cost and think, well, what if there is an extra cost? What if Jagex says it'll be an extra $3 a month to use the old school version as well as the modern version? And for a player who only wanted the old school version, they don't want to pay $3 more and get just the old school one, especially when it's got a dev team of 4 guys. And at one point, 3 guys, because Nexus moved back. So Mod Pips, now CEO, by the way, he made the call, no, we're going to keep the price. We're not going to change it. We can go public and tell the players that we're not going to add an uplift for the foreseeable future. And we never have. It's still the exact same subscription.
There was a rise in the price, though, wasn't there? There was an update of 2014, actually. Was that a global?
Prices, yeah, subscription prices changed over time because running costs, inflation, and all that malarkey. But old school has never been a higher subscription than RS3.
Oh, I see. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess that brings us on to the year of 2014. So I've got a list of updates that I've kind of scrimped through. There's a couple which weren't really relevant, so I didn't really bother noting them down. But January the 9th, we've got the first update I could find on the archives, which was the minigame grouping and poll 14 for minigame group finders and the Zami Hastra as well as the Smith X.
I believe we kicked off the year with some Slayer things. The Slayer helm might have turned up about that.
Oh, I have got that one. That was on, I believe that was actually the update just after. It was, no, it was on the 23rd of January, that one. And that was the Slayer Caves, no, it wasn't. It was on, sorry, the 7th of February. It was the Slayer Cave I, as well as the Trident of the Sea. I've got that as the 7th.
Yeah, I think we did the helm itself previously and added in a viewed version later.
Oh, that would make sense. I couldn't find that on the, maybe the archive didn't have it or I'd missed it or something. So you started.
Yeah, our news module wasn't really functional until late 2013, and we were still struggling a bit even a few months after that.
Well, maybe 2013 you could fill us in then on the updates, because unfortunately I tried finding them in the first one, as I say, was the 9th of Jan of 2014. So,
well, as you say, it's fine to gloss over much of 2013. Players were still nervous about how much the game might change. We didn't have the resources or the tools to offer much. I mean, when you can't even smooth out a bit of landscape and map down a new tree, you really are quite limited for what kind of content you can have to an MMO. And when you can't move things around the menu, then again, you can't do much with that either. And we didn't have any means of editing 3D models, nor anyone in the team who knew how to edit the 3D models. So yeah, we were limited as hell. We kept players engaged. We made a new mini game, some regrets, but we were able to at least make something rather than nothing. And it was all we could do at the time, really. Sure, it wouldn't live up to today's standards, but I think if we held out and said, no, we're not going to launch anything till it can be up to perfect standards, we probably wouldn't have got to launch anything at all. And we could see that player numbers were drifting away throughout 2013, only when we started being more adventurous with what we changed. And yeah, God Wars Dungeon, a PvP world. Only when we started doing that kind of thing and talking seriously about Slayer expansions did numbers stabilize and start coming up again, which helped because it meant that the studio was happy to keep investing in us, hire more staff. We got Mod John C kicking off 2014. We'd evolved under Matt Kay's leadership as a community guy to have these regular live streams and to be active on social media, something that was really quite new to running an MMO at the time, I guess. So going into 2014, we were now actually starting to curve back up again. We'd got new staff coming in, hired just for us. We'd got the dev tools we wanted. We still didn't know how to use the model editor, by the way, but we were allowed to. They said they'd hire us an artist, so we got Mod Alfie. And we could now do stuff like have a new cave with Slayer monsters in it, something that we couldn't have done a few months earlier. And stuff just gradually picked up as players became confident that we weren't going to vanish again and take their progress with them. So people kept playing and bringing their friends back in.
I mean, I can definitely say that showing that you could make changes to the game in the first place, I think, as you say, was better than waiting for the perfect time to be able to do it properly. Well, not properly, but to be able to do it to a level that you would now call your normal sort of level. So I that does bring us on to 2014, I guess. And then so I've got here that your first 2014 update, you're working on the health orbs and prayer orbs.
Yes, it was a popular request. We figured, yeah, we can do that. Now we have an interface editor, so we can actually edit the top level interface, the game frame. And 2D sprites, well, I'm not an artist. I can do a very, very limited amount of 2D work if I have to, but actually some player very kindly put together the sprites for us and sent them to us, and I was able to adapt them as required and get them in the game. He later applied for a graphics job but was not successful, sadly.
It's a real shame, actually, because he sounded like he had a lot of good ideas.
The idea of having the orbs was not especially groundbreaking, given that players were asking for the thing, but it was very kind of him to make them, and I'm sorry we didn't get to work with him more. No disrespect to people we did hire, of course, because we did get them and they did a lot for us.
I remember seeing Alfie's work actually and meeting him in 2016, and he was definitely a very talented kid. So, well, not kid, he was old. He's as old as I am, but talented man
so
at that
kid
point.
From my point of view.
Okay, so I've got then obviously Wilderness Rejuvenation 2 was one of the big updates of the year, and it came on the 20th of January that year. You had reduction in Slayer in magic defense for the ranged and magic shields. Lava Dragon Bones now buried on the Isle get 3 times XP. Cost of efficiency of the new staff has been altered, and I'm guessing new staff would have been the Trident of the Sea. No, that was way later. What was the new staff at that point?
I can't remember what that point would have been really. For description, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. It's my fault. I haven't written it down. New stuff has been old, so I'm sure someone else would be able to work that one out.
I mean, we'd done the Staff of the Dead, but that would have been late 2013, I think.
Yeah, and maybe it was Staff of the Dead. Maybe it was because this was still only January, so I'm assuming it was probably related to that. Actually, that's a very fair point. And then even in January 2014, even though we got them a lot later, idea of Revenants was starting to be talked about.
It was. I mean, there were a few things that were almost taboo in early old school RuneScape. But we knew that players would not countenance EOC coming to it. They wouldn't want MTX coming to it. Another thing that they didn't necessarily want was trade restrictions and all the stuff that came with that. Because the end of 2007 had been the trade restrictions, the removal of PvP in the wilderness, the removal of free trade. Revenants came from that. And it's not like anyone liked them when they first turned up. They weren't made for people to like them. It was, we are required to have something in the wilderness in 2008 that is aggressive, preys on you, and makes you pay attention and watch your back while you're in the area. Thus, Revenants turned up. They were not seen as a positive thing. Now, of course, between 2008 and 2011, 2012, players got used to them. Players certainly got used to them being moved out of the wilderness into a cave when PvP actually was allowed and free trade was allowed again in 2011. But Revenants was still slightly tainted by the fact that it came from the trade restrictions. And that whole topic was a bit taboo still. Maybe shouldn't have been, but it was.
Well, there was a reason for the trade restrictions being there. It was all there to. I believe it was one of the mechanisms they used to try and stop gold farmers and mules, and the idea of mules. So
that was the gold farmers was the concern. There were many articles about it. End of 2007, start of 2008. One of the most memorable articles was an interview given by the then head of content for RuneScape. He gave an interview to Eurogamer, and I'm not sure what message he was aiming for, but the headline they went with, the title was "Real World Trading Like Prostitution," says RuneScape Bigwig. Yeah, we think that the message he was trying to get across wasn't the message he got across. I tried Googling that. I mean, there's still reference to it on the internet, but I can't find the whole article anymore. Anyway, Eurogamer ran with that. And that guy maybe didn't do so many interviews for a bit. He's doing just fine in his own studio these days, by the way. But
okay.
He's gone on to great things, but that was not his finest moment. I kind of offered him my sympathy because I could see it had just gone terribly, terribly wrong there for what he was trying to get across.
It was certainly an interesting way of phrasing it, but it's probably one of those moments which is, as you say, it's in your head, it makes sense, and then you say it out loud and you go, no, maybe that wasn't the words I should have used.
He has not gone into politics, and maybe he's got people doing press releases for him these days. But
although the stuff that comes out of politics isn't too far different, really, nowadays.
Well, just sometimes you see a major politician come out with something where if you spent long enough trying, you could probably work out why it seemed reasonable to them.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't have to. And it still wasn't a good thing for him to have said.
No, exactly. And probably saying on morning television in the UK as well that our country is the best country and we beat out every other one, and that's why we were so quick to find a vaccination, for instance.
Oh, yes.
It was hard to watch, and I don't find stuff hard to watch usually, but I was just sitting there thinking, who let you out of the house, really?
Maybe he's got a safe seat.
But better be. We'll find out in the next couple of weeks, I guess. So after that, we've got the 23rd, which was the Slayer Caves, high risk worlds, and then the introduction of high risk PKM worlds, the Stronghold Slayer Caves specifically, Batch of Slayer awards, and the worlds being 337 and 365 for the high risk. I remember at the time this being hugely popular.
it meant it shook up some pre-existing mechanics. People had to adapt if they were using those worlds, and well, considering we hadn't been able to do very much in the way of new content, something that shook up the existing mechanics was going to be maybe a welcome change, or at least a change.
And the PvP community has obviously recently gone through some very, I don't know, I don't want to say they were the wrong changes, but Crucible wasn't a good idea. And I know that wasn't as recent as 2014, but like there wasn't really any major updates bar EOC and some, they basically taken the wilderness away. So they must have been loving this.
Well, we'd certainly acquired a lot of that community because, as you say, they weren't sticking around for the Crucible like they might have been. And this, I think, did work for them. The idea of, a bit more risk so that you're more likely to get what the opponent's got is, well, a very, very understandable request. Risking old school RuneScape has been a challenging thing because, bear in mind, around the end of 2014, when game worlds would just be inaccessible for many minutes at a time, we felt forced to temporarily make PVM deaths almost completely safe across a lot of the game, except if you couldn't get on that world again for an hour, or if you couldn't remember which world it was. Two things that were still very harshly penalised. So that wasn't really a very nice setup. But we had very few options at the time. We did that as an emergency measure, and I am relieved that we have finally got rid of that emergency measure.
It was called. It was actually one of the updates later in the year, and it was called at the time a temporary change to death mechanics.
I actually,
in a sense.
I thought we'd have got rid of it in 2018. The team coalesced around a design involving gravestones that hopped whichever world you hop to, and that count down only while you're logged in. But there were aspects that needed refining. We hadn't written enough carve outs for Ultimate Iron players, and they didn't want their meta changing. We needed to refine what happened on a repeated death. So we didn't get to do it in 2018. And it wasn't until, well, about a year later that part of the team was able to go back and focus on it and do an updated version of the blog and start pitching that one in early 2020. We got rid of the temporary measures in the end. And in a sense, that brought risk back to PVM to places where it had not been. Because while certain bosses had their death cough for, pay 100,000 coins to get your stuff back from this chest, take as long as you like, most places didn't. So your stuff would be on the ground for very, very easy access and you hadn't really risked it. Or you were in an instance in which case your stuff was completely gone, no chance of getting it back, whatever. This is very disproportionate and made little sense. I'm pleased that players were willing to let us make it harsher than it had been during that time. Because while this is the compromise we launched has a lot of oddities where we agree to keep this bit of behavior that's arisen over the years, like loot, a pile of supplies. We agreed to keep that rather than nerfing it. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but we figured it would help acceptance of the change if we agreed to these compromises. Maybe we shouldn't have. Maybe we should have agreed to more of them. I'm sure everyone will feel they are right on this matter on both sides.
I think it's one of those things though that there's never going to be the right compromise because, as you say, that both sides are going to have their opinions on that. Same as anything, really, I guess. Same as any poll you ever run in the game. It's never going to be 100% correct because not everyone agrees on everything. So yeah, the release after that was Kraken, which was the first major new boss release, I want to say, in the game.
certainly the Kraken boss was the first boss. The Krakens themselves were the first creature. Now, they're not exactly new. They are the sea troll queen, painted a slightly different shade of brown. But we didn't have anyone who could do 3D modeling. And we only just got a tool that could edit the models at all, or even open their files. Didn't come with training on how to use it. We worked with what we could do. And for all, old school RuneScape was the old game. The day we launched the Slayer Cave with Kraken in it was the day we started creating new content that had never. It wasn't a modified version of what RS3 had. It was something just different. And I recall a senior RS3 dev wants to hammer home to me what a very significant thing this was. We were diverging from the game. We weren't just being the nostalgia one anymore. We were trying to develop in a different direction. He wanted to make sure I really understood the ramifications of this. So, yep, we are developing new content for the game, for our players. And yep, it's not stuff RS3's got. Yep. It's possible he wants me to, back away from this. I don't know. Well, we didn't.
Thank God you didn't. And I think some of the most innovative, as I said last week, some of the most innovative mechanics in gameplay have come from that decision, which is awesome to see. So moving on to February, this one was a bit of a non-update, but I thought it'd be quite interesting to talk about. So obviously you did the podcasts every week, the broadcasts every week with the Q&A, but this one I believe was one of your first major Reddit AMAs on the 5th.
We thought it would be good PR, and it didn't feel so groundbreaking at the time, to be honest. Like, I've been pretty player facing for several months at this point. The idea of doing it on that platform rather than the usual didn't seem all that remarkable to me. But I think we may have bigged it up in the news post anyway, because we wanted a lot of attention and we wanted to trend and be trended. And we felt we got some stuff to celebrate.
Definitely. I mean, I think the choice to interact with the community in a way that your team was definitely groundbreaking at the time. But I think it's also set some trends and precedents for a lot of different companies now to kind of follow that mantra.
Well, it's more fun if you're a developer, and the motivation can come from the players who are playing the content. I've often said this: if I were sitting behind a desk being told, program one of these, says some middle manager, and I program one of those, and he says, good boy, here's your paycheck, now program one of these, and here's my next mission, I'll go and do that. I mean, sure, the paychecks are useful because we're the best one in the world. Whatever we might be willing to do for fun, I also need to feed wife and 2 stepkids, and I still have a slight mortgage. So we live in the real world too, but it's a lot more meaningful to me getting to do content that ultimately goes to players and is received by them, and the feedback is from them, not from somebody ticking the box and saying, yes, you programmed the thing I told you to, but from players saying, this is a big improvement, or this could be even better if you change this, or this sucks, kill yourself. You get a bit of that, but they don't really listen to me, mostly. The ones that do aren't really worth listening to.
No. And I think that kind of brings up something I didn't ask last week that is to do with this, actually. There is this, as we were saying last week, the internet is one of those places where people's inhibitions and manners and whatever else go out the window somewhat. Majority of this community, though, I mean, you do get the odd couple, of course, but I think the benefit of talking to the people that make the game you love kind of also gives humility to those playing it and creating content around it to an extent. I don't know if you'd agree on that one or.
I don't really look for it's humility in the player. It's not something I look for. Humility is something that I believe we should show the players. What you do get though is people who show passion. That's what you're seeing mostly is passion. People who got an idea for the game and they're confident it's good enough. They want to take it to the devs and see if they can get it in the game. They're doing that because they care enough to use their imagination and come up with stuff. And that's great. We can't often do it. I mean, with the best will in the world, we could trawl the internet for one day and book ourselves up with development work for a year and a half. So most people's ideas ain't going to get taken. But the bit where they bothered sending them in the first place, that's appreciated. And most are serious. Some are not. Some hopefully are not. Or if they are, you should probably play a different fantasy game. Or subscribe to a different online service. But now you do get players who they're passionate, and it's not just things who just really want to get this idea in. Sometimes their passion will be expressed negatively. Sometimes they will decide they're so incensed by a blog that's got a colleague's name on it that they want us to fire that colleague. And it's not because they're not bad people, I'm sure. They just sincerely believe that for the good of the game, that person should not be in the team because that person is credited with this idea is not good, therefore the idea needs to go away, and the person who's accredited with it should go away as well. This is logical to them, I'm sure. Now, the thing is, what players can't always see on the outside is what went into the idea in the first place, what went into the blog. We stick somebody on a live stream to present an idea, doesn't mean they came up with it. Doesn't always mean they'll agree with every aspect of it. Sometimes, I've had projects over the 16 years I've worked here that I didn't like and didn't want to do. But I could either say, no, I am so absolutely sure that this should not be done, that I refuse to do it. Fire me if you like, and dare Jagex to do that. Which ultimately they should if I start acting that way, because the studio would rather have a member of staff who will do what's required. And I might not be right about this ultimatum in the first place. So why the hell should I go around acting like that? No, sometimes a member of staff will end up taking one for the team. And the players, mostly players, are good about separating don't like the idea from want to do bad things to the member of staff. Sometimes players don't. But even those players, I have to believe that at the bottom of it all, it's because they cared so much about the game that they just need to say, they need to make it personal, because that's the only way they can show how strongly they feel. Doesn't make it all right.
No, and I think for a lot of them as well, as a lot of people, not saying just this community, a lot of people in the world generally, if they find something they love, they consider the people who are a part of that almost a family. And however strange the metaphor is, families fight. And I think that's probably like, I know a lot of people who live or are alive because of this game, and however dramatic that sounds, I do have people I've known for a fair few years who wouldn't have probably kept living if it hadn't been for communities like this.
And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And wherever you find it, the internet's a great place. Face-to-face communities have their benefits also of one's in a position to get one. But yeah, reading about how important social media can be to people. Hell, even I suddenly found myself in touch with my cousins through social media when I previously wouldn't have been, because we just hadn't met since a funeral in the 90s. But suddenly, hey, I can actually communicate with this guy who's related to me. Oh my God, that's cool. Yeah, a community is a very important thing, and it's wonderful to get to be part of one that's connected so many people over the years.
Yeah, I mean, it just reminds me of, you know, someone like the old knight who, although unfortunately didn't survive his illness, was, you know, a great inspiration, I think, for a lot of people at the time. I remember not specifically ever, you know, talking to the old knight or anything, but you did hear of him when he was around, and it was that sort of, there was that, you know, that real sadness when he didn't make it through his illness and that sort of thing. So there's the down points to it as well, but I think it also, with bad circumstances comes a better community, because I remember after that, it wasn't for that long after that, but it was for, you know, a few months, people were going out of their way to kind of follow in his mantra of politeness and helpfulness.
Cool. Well, I've got a little tip of the hat to him in the 20th anniversary event. A subtle one, but those who see it will know who we're thinking about.
Yeah. And he, you know, he will be greatly missed. He is greatly missed. So going from something very deep to something maybe a bit more light-hearted, we've got. So I'm actually going to skip a few of these updates this year, this month of March we're on now. So it's a rejuvenation of the wilderness with more risks, rewards, buses, monsters, resource monsters as well, and mammoths. I think mammoths are at the same time.
They were. We found the model in the work in progress archive from 2007. It wasn't actually being worked on in 2007. It was an unused model that was just sitting around there that we could dig out and plug in without needing artists to be available for us. And thus we could have some interesting looking creatures. Mod Reach had originally dug out the mammoths when he was celebrating Old School's first birthday. And he celebrated by having, you know, a teleport to the terrain that was Prifdinus, you know, the empty block that was Prifdinus, filled it with, you know, a few NPCs he'd dug out of the archive, and people could see the mammoths for the first time. And the original idea for lizard men, long before ever came up with anything for Zaya, lizard men had been on a blog that Andrew Gower wrote in 2004, and somebody had actually modelled them, but we never shipped it. So, well, we put those in there as well. They looked remarkable. I mean, people can see them in the client cache anyway. We left the model in, but they were quite groundbreaking for the time. Yeah, we just dug out a load of these things and hadn't celebrated our birthday with them. Mammoths came back again for this wilderness thing you described.
Yeah, I was always fascinated by their knees. They never seemed quite the same length as they should have been. They're always very sort of jutted. It's quite an interesting model though. So it was the Prifdinus party, wasn't it? The 20th anniversary, where they opened the gates of Prifdinus, as you say, and it was. I wasn't there for it, unfortunately, but it was from what I was reading of the update, it seemed like quite a good giggle.
Certainly 2014, we celebrated Old School's first birthday by putting people in Prifdinus and filling it with interesting creatures. And Reach dug out some old models, you know, how demons used to look, how dragons used to look, put them in. I think we'd not had much scope to put him through the full content developer training, and he was on a bit of time pressure. So the dragons were sometimes deforming a little as they went, where the animation being called wasn't the one that was intended for that version of the dragon model. Anywho, it was still good fun. Yeah. And it was fun, and it was not trying to take itself seriously. Like the Lost City of the Elves, it's full of mammoths. That was not intended as canonical lore. That was intended as a little bit of fun for a couple of weeks, and then we'll take it away again.
Although I'd love that to be canonical lore. Something about it just sounds absurd in the best way possible. You know, a bunch of very dainty elves and just a lumbering mammoth that occasionally glitches out, and
Yep.
you know.
Well, I like the kind of slightly whimsical humour like that. There's something that the Gowers used to do. Like take the Knights of Camelot around the Round Table. I think King Arthur explains to you that, he's King Arthur. Here's his Knights of the Round Table. Here's his Round Table. Looks like any other bloody table to me. But if you ask him what you're doing here, he explains, well, it is prophesied that we will return to England in her hour of need. So until then, we're hanging out in RuneScape. I like that.
There is so many there's so many sort of, you know, little puns in there and little references that in RuneScape that just make it so just insequentially English in the best possible way. Like obviously the reference of the sandwich lady to, as was said on one of the look back streams, to your actual sandwich lady, canteen lady in Jagex HQ.
Yeah, St John's Innovation Centre has a canteen for all the office staff who rent office space in that building, and they got a little extra trade by sending one of their staff around with a trolley with sandwiches and baguettes and chocolate bars, etc. It seemed like a great thing to add, especially when she was made quite aggressive. The model of the NPC was not based on the real person's appearance. Just saying.
I mean, I would love it though if you refused to take the sandwich he offered you, that you'd somehow end up somewhere in Oxford.
Well, if you asked for something that she hadn't got, she'd get quite frustrated. So have you got any cheese and pickle? No, I said we got cheese, we got ham, we got tuna. Have you got any beef? No, I said we got chicken. It was that's the kind of thing that led to. Oh. Hey, I didn't say you have that in the sandwich lady's dialogue.
Oh, it's there could be a whole sitcom written around the years at the office, I think, which would be a damn sight better than the British Emmerdales and Coronation Streets we have now, at least on a personal level. I tried watching 20 minutes the other day and I just lost the plot.
I couldn't handle soap operas once I realised there wasn't going to be a happy ending or an ending.
No, it's the same with me and a massager I had, actually. Anyway, sorry, bit of an overshare. Terrible joke.
We don't have video onto this as far as I can tell. So,
well, I do on OBS, unfortunately, so that came up. Yeah, no, because I have to have my camera on OBS. I can't have two sources of the same one, which I can actually sort out for next week because I have a second webcam. Yeah, well, next time, maybe not next week. Probably not good to schedule in advance. So there was a couple of changes to Quick Press. So Quick Press was introduced, which I assume was actually quite a job.
Menu work always is, but it's all right. There was some back and forth about exactly how they should behave. Like if you turn off quick prayers, should it turn, and you've got a prayer that was turned on by this method rather than that method, should it turn it off? If you click the quick prayer button rather than clicking the prayer manually, or you could go round and round on that kind of discussion. Well, we ended up with the behavior what you've got. We considered changes. We decided this was probably more intuitive, and players probably didn't want to mess with it, so it is.
Well, I mean, I can imagine. I would assume at the time the people who were most, if you did actually have anyone who would go, this isn't right, would be the PvPers, but I can't remember a big backlash to it.
Well, Ronan did a bit of poking around the community to see what opinions were, and eventually we figured this seems most straightforward and intuitive. We should probably stick with it rather than trying to do something clever that might be more convenient to certain circumstances, but might also be confusing.
It does make a good amount of sense, actually. Of course it does, because it's in the game. So we've also got that month. Actually, this is a month before, but I missed it. But it's the sort of fresh old fashion. Was the head of the post, which was the 7 male haircuts and facial hair.
Yeah,
Well,
we kind of trawl through the archive of half-finished, unreleased stuff, found a bunch of haircuts and such like, and plugged them in. We didn't have, well, we had a modeling tool at this point, but it was still pretty obscure, and we didn't know very much about how to use it. So there were some graphical issues come from that update. On the other hand, it generally went down nicely because, we hadn't done a lot of cosmetic stuff, and people do like the fashion scape. So it was good to finally do some. I regret that we can't do more of these things because, a lot of cosmetic recolor jobs are relatively cheap. I mean, they still need an artist to do the paint job or the remodel job or whatever. And that's not always available, but it's relatively cheap, relatively harmless. We don't want to get to a situation where nobody can recognize any item because, your what used to be a rune plate body has actually been disguised as an orange spiky jerkin that nobody can recognize as a rune plate anymore. But we never needed to go that far. It would be nice to have a few more costume things.
And I think, without naming any other games, we can see the result of some of those decisions not play out so well in other communities.
We found in a survey that players considered it important they be able to recognise roughly what something was at a glance. And that makes a hell of a lot of sense.
It really does. I actually remember, I think it was around the time of Iron Man, I want to say. I've actually got that on the later update in October. But I remember setting up the Iron Man, and I hadn't looked at anything cosmetic on the base level since, the start of Old School RuneScape in 2013, really, and creating the account. And I just remember thinking, oh, this is nice, and then spending 20 minutes trying to work out if I wanted rips in my trousers or not, even though they'd already been there previously. So what can I say? So in April, Motherload Mine.
Oh, that was fun. We decided to do another player design content poll where players could pitch a rough design for an update. They wouldn't have to put all the numbers in, but they describe how the mechanics worked, and we'd put our favourite 4 or 5 to a poll and implement whichever one was most popular if it passed the 75% poll, which Motherload Mine was the one that went to the poll. Motherload Mine passed its poll. Reach was nearly assigned to program it, but I don't think he was all that. I don't think he'd really got why it was going to be fun, and wasn't all that keen. And by the time, eventually I finished the project I was previously on and found Motherload Mine was still ready to be done, so I took it. And now we didn't have a lot of new models here because we now had a model editor and could do very limited things with it, but I couldn't. Still can't really. Reach could slightly, but only slightly. And I made the Motherload Mine looking fairly distinctive. It does not look like the rest of Falador Mines. It's got its own style to it, deliberately so. And the way I did that was by taking the wall kit from the Haunted Mine, which is a grey, stripy grey area, and stretching it and painting it shades of brown. So the Motherload Mine just feels different from what's around it. More a warmer, earthy feel than the well, I'm going to say damp mud look of the rest of Falador mines. It's taller, so it might feel a bit deeper when you're running a camera around it, and it's got. Well, I was able to work with that. I took some machinery from the Swan Song Piscatorus colony to look like stuff what you might find in a mining area, and took bits of the Elemental Workshop Part 1, the wheels, the struts, the water channels, the grating. Had real trouble making it look like the grating lined up right, but by having half of the Elemental Workshop thing on level 0 and the water on level 1, but height mapped down so that it appeared to be on level 0 rather than upstairs, I was able to make the water start and stop and have things flowing down the channel that looked like they were plausibly doing so, and cobble the whole damn thing together without any new models. Now, the bit where we did have some new art was for the reward outfits. What I originally thought we'd give was Prospector Percy's outfit, because I thought it looked pretty cool. In fact, it does look cool. In fact, Disney has one of those. He's called Stinky Pete from Toy Story 2, which is why it's Prospector Percy rather than Prospector Pete, which it was originally going to be. We thought Disney might actually notice that one.
Yeah, their track records and post records you guys would have had a lot of interesting claims on that one, I think.
His name is Percy, and we've never launched him under any other name. He just looks like he looks like a stereotypical prospector from the old days of the gold rush, we think. For what it's worth, it's quite amusing. Reach was originally looking into the gold rush because Matt Kay said, Google the gold rush. You'll get some ideas from the kinds of pictures of people panning for gold in the Yukon, etc. And Reach came back to the conclusion, we can't do that. They all look like Hitler. Now, that probably isn't the case, but I think what's actually happened is that he'd found pictures of the Charlie Chaplin movie called The Gold Rush. And Charlie Chaplin does have that tash. So it might have given him the impression that the Wild West of America during the Gold Rush era was full of guys who looked like Hitler. Whereas, in fact, it might just have been Charlie Chaplin the whole time.
It would have been a different update. It would have been a very different update if that had been the case.
Well, once we cobbled together the Prospector Percy graphics, I spent a good half hour on company time on YouTube watching Yosemite Sam cartoons so I could get the feel of that style of talking, and then I could write Prospector Percy's dialogue. And I had an idea for the music track, which became Pick and Shovel, which, I've read the YouTube comments. They're right. It is too cheerful. Sorry, I was having a bit too much fun there. Oh, well.
I like it.
It's popular enough, bit shrill in places, but it is a little too cheerful for a mine. On the other hand, maybe the dwarves are just happy.
And or completely drunk, which is either way works.
I just liked that. Well, the dwarves actually were running around with their shovels, banging on the wall, banging on the wall, banging on the wall here. And, it didn't feel like such a bad idea at the time, and it's a kind of cozy, light-coloured mine. We had a lot of fun there.
I think I honestly do think it was one of those updates that I know I complained last week about the easiness of it, in my opinion, but actually I had a rethink on that one, and I retract that statement. But I think it's such a mining before was such a dismal skill to level that change with the cheerfulness I think actually wasn't a bad shout at all. Yeah.
The fact that mining, you get one ore and the rock depletes, that's a standard thing anyway, that's always been something I disliked about it. But equally, I don't especially like how fishing, you keep getting fish indefinitely, and the fishing spot is not depleted by that. It moves on, it's on a fixed timer. That's why woodcutting was always my favourite of the three, because sometimes the tree depletes, sometimes it doesn't. It's not because you're doing anything wrong, it's just a luck thing. So you don't feel bad, although other players will occasionally try to make you feel bad.
Yeah.
You made the tree go down. It was going to anyway at some point. But Motherlode Mine was a little bit like mining, but with a little flavour of the woodcutting, where things don't always deplete. You aren't going from place to place all the time. I just find it a lot more relaxing that way.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, Alicia12287, when she used to stream just woodcutting for 7 hours a day, I mean, it was relaxing to watch at that point. And then the next month brings us to something that I'm really disappointed didn't get into the game, but I can understand why it didn't. It's the new skill proposed, which is artisan, astronomy, forestry, geomancy, or herding. I quite like the idea of herding for the absurdity just of the idea that you are leveling herding.
Well, we might do animal husbandry one day, not as a skill necessarily. It could be part of farming, or not part of a skill at all. Just a thing what you do, and the creatures give you resources through whatever you're doing there. Could call it a mini game, but I would have enjoyed working on something of the sort. Anyway, artisan, it's had its interest. Even these days, people suggest that if we just dolled up the design a bit more, maybe it would pass these days. Well, for what it's worth, a new skill is something that has often been requested. It's got majority interest in a new skill. And considering the impact such a thing could have, it does feel appropriate for us to occasionally, look into doing one. But rather than saying they'd like a new skill, here's a huge design, to which players can quite legitimately say, actually, I'm not one of those who wants a new skill at all, take the whole thing away. Or, yes, I did want a new skill, but not this one. Rather than starting with the big design and trying to refine it to try and get a bit more support, an extra percentage here or there of supporters, what we would like to do, I think, is start with much more basics polls of, would you be interested in any skill at all? That's not a yes, you voted yes, there will be a skill, but would you like us to do more blogs about skills like this or like that or like something else entirely, and let players maybe narrow in on it, so that at each point we're going with something that's got more consensus support than anything else, and see if we can get from there to something that players are comfortable for us to write a design about. See, when we did warding blogs, a lot of the criticism was, how dare you spend time writing this blog without having polled it? I want your time to spend on other things instead. To which, honestly, no, please get used to the idea that people will spend time writing a blog before there is a poll. Otherwise, how could there be a poll? Sorry.
You can't have a proposal before an idea. So it's
under that, there is still their genuine concern that we'd spent a lot of time doing it, and that we must therefore be so invested in it that we would put it in the game regardless. Well, we didn't. So hopefully that's reassured them slightly. And if anyone who accused us of planning such a thing wishes to apologise, the internet's open. But I think it would get a much clearer sense that there's player interest in something if there's evidence that shows it. If players have gone through groups saying, no, we are okay with seeing more about this kind of thing, then we'd have spent more time talking about the details of warding and less time with people saying, how dare you talk about a skill at all? Nobody wants to talk about a skill, not even going to read the details. And that might save us from spending time on things that do end up being a waste of time, because warding didn't work out. If we'd stopped a blog draft earlier, then yes, a few person days of work would have been saved there. Maybe those person days of work would have turned into the update that the player was gagging for that we never got to release because we were spending time on this instead, or maybe not. But I think if we make it a lot clearer that the direction we're going down is one that we think is one that players have shown they're interested in, then we can spend more time focusing on the details of it rather than arguing about whether we should even be having the discussion.
No, exactly. And you know, no offense to the players, but your job roles are there for a reason. You have more knowledge on implementation and planning than most.
We can generally tell whether we're spending so long designing something that it's not worth it. And mostly we like to get that identified before we get, well, we probably wouldn't go through that many iterations of a blog spread over such a long period of time. That was the other thing. The time spent on it went on for weeks. I think ultimately people were starting to lose interest and resent that we hadn't given up after they tweeted no the last time. Mind you, the thing ultimately got pretty strong. It got a majority support. For most of the Twitter activity I saw about it was critical at the time. I ran a Twitter poll alongside the real poll, and somebody ran an official Reddit poll. And what we found is that if it was just Facebook voters, I think, then it would probably have come close to passing. Reddit was more supportive than the average, but not enough to get it through. Twitter was still, I think, well over 50% support on the survey I ran, which contrasts interestingly with the messages that I was being sent about it. So it feels like it wasn't such a bad thing for us to spend the time designing. But if we do another one, which I don't see being in 2021 necessarily, but if we next approach the community with ideas for a skill, I think we'll let them narrow us down to the choice of what skill and what themes it's got, rather than starting with our presentation. Because that way it's more likely to be something that will get support, and it'll be a lot clearer to everybody that that's where it came from.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it, I guess, because from my memory of it, Artisan initially had a really nice response, and then I think it was people were very annoyed at certain aspects of it, weren't they?
I remember that they got quite annoyed after the first run of it, where we insisted on doing another draft of the blog and asking them whether they'd like it better now. Some felt that we weren't allowed to ask that kind of question. We should take the first draft fails, never allowed to speak of it again. Now, personally, I think that's a little harsh. Now, an example I used in a discussion with a player back in the earliest days, the player was saying, you're just going to poll the same thing over and over and over and over again until it gets through, because you'll have worn us down and we won't be able to vote no anymore. Well, firstly, if you can play RuneScape, you can probably handle clicking on the no button. I'm sure you can if you can, train your skills.
You'd hope.
And it's not that much harder than clicking the yes button. But be that as it may, if we do repoll something with changes, I expect the changes to be meaningful. So if I went and polled, shall we add the orange sword of one hits everything? And players said, no, because it one hits everything, don't launch that. And I turned around and said, you didn't accept that. How about the green sword of one hits everything? It's different, see? Then no, that is a little bit too much the same thing. But on the other hand, if I said, all right, you don't want the orange sword that one hits everything, how about the orange sword that just deals standard damage, but it's orange? If a player said, no, it's an orange sword again, you've failed a poll with orange swords. You can't have an orange sword. You just ask the same thing over and over and over again. I don't think I'd agree with that player. Now, of course,
No.
they have to vote. They could still vote no, but I would not feel that we were being dishonest in offering something that was substantially different to what they'd rejected before.
No, and I mean, a lot of updates have come from those initially rejected ideas anyway.
And also, over time, things change. I honestly believe that if we polled the God Wars dungeon straight off in 2013 when we launched in February, March, when the game was fresh, I don't think it would have passed. A few months later, when people were starting to feel that actually they could do something that's a bit more end game than the Calfight Queen, God Wars was suddenly a lot more popular. And the people saying, no, it's overpowered and ruined the game, they weren't the prevalent voices anymore.
Well, it's like this Steam thing now, like the reception from the community is one which is, yes, there's a lot of people saying we don't want new players in, but if this had been polled even last year, not that it was polled, but even if it was suggested last year, I think the backlash would have been so much bigger. But now that everyone's stuck at home,
The example I often think of from the earlier days of RuneScape was Miniclip. 2000, late 2004, Jagex does some partnership deal where RuneScape is offered on the Miniclip website, and suddenly we're getting 1,000 new accounts created per day, legitimate ones even. And I remember some outcry. I was like, you're bringing in all these noobs who don't know how the game should be. You should stick with just having us, the loyal players. We'll be around for ages. These noobs will just come in and go away again because they'll have no staying power, and they'll ruin the game. Well, it's possible that if we just stuck with the ultimate loyal players, many of them really would stay a very long time because they got that real passion, and I really respect that. But they cannot be sufficient by themselves. They may be really, really great members of the community, but we cannot realistically accept them as the only members of the community and let anyone else just push off again. Because however loyal they are probably mortal. And even if one's life expectancy is probably a few decades yet, given our usual demographics, life events happen. People can't play for anymore. If we stuck with just the uber loyalists, who I do not think we'd be around for that much longer. Maybe a couple of years of decline as people drift away over time. But no, to keep the community healthy, I'm afraid we do have to be open to new people coming into it. And sure, the ideal is when people bring in their friends, people, existing players bring in more players, and they bring in more players. But I do not think it's unreasonable to let the game be seen by a big audience, and indeed let existing players try it or access it through different means. Getting on mobile was a request that players wanted long before we went on mobile. You can tell, not from, data aside and surveys aside, you can tell by the fact that people were trying to set up software that would control their desktop computer from their mobile device so they could play on mobile. That suggests there was a market for us to be on mobile properly. And I've heard people asking over the years, like, can we access this via Steam? We think it'd be really convenient and better. I mean, they may have even just wanted to grow the community because they feel that would be good for the game to have a growing community. Well, let's hope.
I mean, I don't think existing players will go to Steam, unfortunately, because of the Rune Lite client.
Well, it's fine by
but
me if they don't, because I believe Steam takes a cut. I don't know the commercial details, but um, I see little win for us in cannibalizing our own community just to favour Steam. On the other hand, making us accessible to more people who might want to give us a try feels reasonable.
oh, definitely. I mean, I think it's a good idea. I mean, look what Miniclip did for the game way back 16 years ago. I mean,
And for all the assumptions might have been, oh, these people just come in and go out again because they're not going to have any staying power like the rest of us. Well, some of them did come in and stay that long. I'm pretty sure we've hired some of them as staff after they've been playing for years and years and years. Now they work on it.
yeah, I mean, I've been playing in 2002 and took 6 or 7 months of not playing. Saw it again on Miniclip. Thought, oh, it's been a while, and I'm still about. Still can't find my way from Falador to Varrock without having to check the map. I don't know why or how, but there we go.
Well, that barbarian village is fascinating place, I'm sure.
I end up in Edgeville every time. I don't know why. I just can't do geography. So there was like sort of polls for the changes to God Swords and Slayer Helm Eye, and the middle mouse button obviously controlling the camera. That was a big thing, and then the Valentine's Day events. And
yeah, we would do. Was that chocolate strawberries?
it was the one with the cook who was trying to impress his new girlfriend, the Lumbridge cook.
Yeah. At the time, well, community-led game. We had a community manager, Matt Kay, giving quite a lot of steering for what would be good for engagement. An extra holiday event seemed like a good idea if it could be done quickly and cheaply, which it could. Of course, none of them are that quick and cheap. They still take time, and these days we've tried to rationalise by not having so many holiday events. We ran a survey even in about 2017 and found that players felt that the amount that maybe 2 or 3 weeks developing an event is more suitable than 6 or whatever we did for some of the Halloween events in 2017. The event with Jonas and the Jonas Mask was amazing, but the damn thing was just too darn big. We could not have justified spending that much time on a temporary event that was gone in less time than it took to write. It had an underwater section even. It was an amazing event, but the appreciation of it compared to Mod Flippy's Goblin Ghosts, it doesn't really stack up considering how quickly Flippy could do that one compared to many, many weeks of the Jonas event. On the other hand, we did do a very cool event, and I'm proud to have assisted with a little bit of it.
I think it was. I'm of the opinion that it does. 6 weeks is too much, obviously, but I think it's good to have those memorable holiday events. I mean, I think a lot of players' timelines the holiday events are definitely part of that as a memory.
I think so. I had an idea for a Christmas event that we haven't done because, again, it's a little big, but the premise is that Santa's dead. I thought that would be quite eye-catching as a start for a Christmas event with Santa being dead.
It sounds very much like what an update you'd want as well. That's your sort of opening. I like it.
Yeah, happy Christmas, Santa's dead. And you've got to work with the necromancer to get him back again. And having got his spirit back into his body, you've got to retrain him on how to be Santa by educating him on, okay, so you enter the house via the chimney, not via whatever you're thinking of. Things like that. And to resurrect him in the first place, you'd have to get the necromancer sampled. You'd need a bit of Santa's beard, using shears on him, having first distracted the grieving family.
Wow.
Which is probably a bit dark, like they're weeping, and you've got to play some prank to make them turn around for a minute while you cut off bits of his beard.
At least it's only his beard.
Yes, well, it seemed one of the most iconic bits of him that people expect to see, I think.
Well, for a 13+ game, it does, yes.
And you require, a bit of his blood as well. But since he's all coagulated due to being dead, you have to make do with the blood of his offspring, Jack Frost, who is established as his son. So you'd have to collect some blood from him instead. Anyway, we probably won't ever do this event because the development time just isn't enough to. It's not worth it for this, but
because that's the main problem with this idea, isn't it, Ash? It's the development time where the idea is definitely gonna be falling down for a child's game.
Also, I was genuinely running a bit of a fever when I wrote this one, this design, and one of my colleagues said she could tell.
I kind of want it to be in the game somehow. I mean, they had the thing of the cows? I can't even remember what update it was, but the cow parts.
Yes, there was one where you had to pin the tail on a cow.
I mean, that's not too far from coagulated blood of Santa, I guess. I mean,
well, actually, no. The pinning the tail on a cow was a Christmas event, 2018, I think. And, well, we shipped it. It was a little bit. Players found it rather hard to tell where the game thought the cow's bottom should be when they were adding the thing. But it had some polish issues there, but I don't have any regrets about us doing it. No, the spinning cow parts was a random event that we never launched, in which the Duke of Bridgelum would want you to reassemble the cows that had been killed in his cow field. So he'd want you to pass in the cow's head, now the cow's front legs, now the cow's hind legs and udders, and finally the cow's tail, and get the right part in the right order. And if you didn't get it in the right order, it would spawn this god-awful mushed up creature made out of, well, cow parts. The QA guy who was first assigned to look over this content gave it one playthrough and said, "Oh my god, this looks like an effing abattoir." And based on his feedback, we did not proceed.
No, I mean, unfortunately as well, at the time, bots weren't really going to be able to appreciate the nuances of it, were they?
Well, frankly, that guy was quite out there. So if he thought something was too revolting, we took him seriously.
That's fair. It's sort of a good measuring stick. So where did we get to? And that the month of, so we were just talking about that month as well, we had the bonds on the 18th of September coming out. No, 18th of July, sorry, coming out.
What, in 2014?
Oh no, sorry, proposal for bonds coming out in 2014, my bad.
It would have taken us a while to get from there to shipping them, I guess.
Yeah, I guess there's not a huge amount to say about that because it was just the proposal of the time. Then there was this sort of the 4-part stage chat name clear up throughout that year as well. What else do we have? We have the changing of death mechanics, as we talked about, was on August 20th. And
we should be getting to Iron Man soon.
Yeah, before that we have the Clan Wars update as well as the Clan Cup.
Yeah, well, it made sense to have a cup once we got a battleground.
Because Clan Wars, in my mind, has been there a lot longer than 6 years.
Clan Wars was first created at the end of 2007 this is going to sound awful. Well, it's not the first time people have been told this, but with the end of 2007 and the knowledge that free trade would be removed from the game, the powers that be sat down and tried to think, what will be lost from the wilderness? Single-way PKing, multi-way PKing. And having identified these two things, Bounty Hunter was created as the replacement for single-way PvP, all of it. And Clan Wars was created as the alternative to multi-way activity with clans fighting together. In that initial draft, you could only have safe fights. You couldn't have any people running back into the fight after dying. It was last person standing wins and is told you won. And no options, just anything goes in there. One arena. It was, well, sad. The developer who was writing it would have struggled to do much more with the time available. I mean, he was struggling a bit with what he'd got. I recall I was asked if I could fix the outstanding issues in it. One of the outstanding issues is at the end of the battle, you might be told you'd won, or you might be told you'd lost, or both, or neither, and it didn't seem to have any correspondence to which team you'd been on. If you changed channel during the battle, you stayed in and were now fighting on the wrong side. And sometimes at the end of the battle, you might be put out of the arena, or you might be put in the sky above it. It was not always clear which would it be. And my conclusion was that he'd been given a very bad structure in the first place. Somebody had advised him to keep things simple for yourself when you're writing this multiplayer mini game. Have two controllers control the whole battle. One controlling team one, the other controlling team two. So we tried to say, no, when you've got two controllers, they might conflict and get confused about which one of them is right about things. Have one controller that controls the whole battle. That actually simplifies things considerably. But to retrofit this, I kind of had to delete his code and rewrite it. Same feature set. I really didn't have the scope to build in more features at that point. Hell, I'd hardly got time to rewrite his code to the same feature set. But we got something that it told you you'd won or you'd lost, and it meant it. It didn't put you in the bloody sky. It still didn't have any useful features, but at least it was a foundation that we could come back and build features on. Anywho, fast forward to old school RuneScape. The version we first launched came with menus. It came with a small choice of terrains. It came with options for run-ins are allowed or not. We didn't do a dangerous option. We probably should, but at the time we thought we'd make them stay in the wilderness if they wanted a dangerous battle, so that they wouldn't be taken out of the wilderness. Could have gone either way there. We may still change it even. But yeah, old school was getting Clan Wars, not the original version, but a version with more features, and also a free-for-all arena because we wanted one of those.
Because there was Odd Skull as well, which was another game mode, wasn't there? Which I've always thought would make a great competitive game itself, but didn't really take off.
Could just be it's not the kind of thing players were wanting in their Clan Wars.
Yeah, I guess.
It did seem like, I have no regrets about it, spending a little time plugging it in. It wasn't that hard. King of the Hill was a bit harder.
Yeah, but actually I never really played much King of the Hill. It was always Odd Skull. I was never any good at any of it, to be honest, but it was always fun. So we jump right ahead to, as you previously said, I think there's nothing really between that and Iron Man on the 13th of October.
That was a heavy few days. We did a lot of the game updates in very quick succession there. Firstly, we had a beta going for the Corp at the time, which required us to sweet talk the engine guys into deploying stuff to a beta world. We don't have beta worlds. I don't know what the guy did to give us one for that purpose, but it got taken away again afterwards. We've never been able to get it back. We want it back. We want to be able to do betas like RS3 does. And I am told we actually might get that in the next year because
it would save you taking
obvious for testing purposes.
It would save you taking worlds down to then have to test like different weaponry, like the nightmare weapons, when you had to basically just take a world and make that only apply to that.
Yes, which didn't quite work first shot because to tie them into the combat system, there were some slight side effects on the existing combat system. It's not a real beta world at all. It's just a world with slightly different rules where this item is available as opposed to the other worlds where it's not. We want real beta worlds, ones where you can log out and in again and it doesn't reset your activity. Something we've still not got. Mod Fed, he's like head of quality assurance in Old School. He's very keen to get this for his guys because it will help them test. It'll help them have a fair chance of picking stuff up and give players a chance to get in on it. So yeah, we want those. Anyway, it's not just about us getting the server. It's about us getting systems that will deploy things to it on demand and reboot it on demand and save game profiles pointing at it. Stuff that we actually didn't have even in 2014 where we were playing with the Corp on one of these. But the engine guy did put a server there. He was able to manually deploy some code to it. The actual dream would be for me to be able to deploy things to it without having to have Uber root access to everything. Never got that. That's part of the request we've still got. But we got this Corp beta going so we could play it at RuneFest. And we'd had the regular game update before RuneFest. And we knew that the Monday after RuneFest, Jagex wanted to launch Iron Man across Old School and RS3 simultaneously. Which meant that, the RuneFest weekend is a fairly heavy one with late nights and stuff and talking to players from dawn till dusk and then some. And, well, it was a slight struggle for me, but that Sunday I came back from London where RuneFest had been, and rather than getting to go straight home, popped into the office to deal with the remaining things that needed sorting before Iron Man could ship. Found that Mod John C was in there as well, having had the exact same thought. We worked together, we fixed the remaining stuff. We went to the Golden Hind and had a very nice drink that we felt we'd earned. And we were ready to ship Iron Man when RS3 wanted to go alongside us. But between Corp beta preparations and the previous Thursday's update and being ready to launch Iron Man early in the week, and the fact that we actually had another update that following Thursday, it was a bloody heavy weekend.
I can imagine, because you had the actual release of Corp, I believe, was the day after Iron Man as well.
Thereabouts, yeah. We were pretty agile.
I mean, that's an understatement. You had arguably two of the biggest releases of anything before 2017 or 18. Actually, Iron Man probably being the biggest release in terms of changes to the game.
It was pretty heavy going. I mean, obviously it helped when we started the programming of it a while back, but the turnaround and all the repository admin, I was quite tired after that lot, especially as RuneFest. It's not a relaxing weekend. Fortunately, I'm quite good at sleeping on public transport.
So moving from Iron Man, there's not, to be honest, it's mainly holiday updates. Hands obviously on the 13th, and we all know what Hands does. I'm actually going to jump right to December just for time as well, as I realize we've been recording for an hour and a half already.
I think you're the one with an early start tomorrow.
Yeah, I've got a 5:45, I want to say, which is, well, I know you're up relatively early most of the time, because I remember seeing you when I think I saw you about 6:40 walk into the office one day, and I'd just come back from somewhere where I'd been on a night out. So, well, obviously you don't have to go to the office, so in that respect.
Harder in the winter months when the sun doesn't come up. It's still dark in my kitchen at about 10 in the morning, Anyway, what was December?
Sorry, no, I was reminiscing myself there for a second. The MMO face-off. I'm not sure what your involvement in this would have been, but it was the plea to be voted for around this time by the company. Not the plea, but mentioning it to the community. What was the MMO face-off?
I have no idea. I'm sorry, I don't remember that in the slightest.
No, that's fair enough. I guess the next one would be Trading Post.
Oh yes, that was an interesting one where we weren't sure players would go for a full GE, which is fine. We thought that was a bit of a stretch as well for the Old School game. But we also understood they wanted a better way of finding people to trade with. They're doing a very good player-organised one via Zyves. Players will work their own things out, but there was still demand for us to have something in the game, so you didn't have to keep going to different websites. So, we inquired, if we do a trading solution, would you like to have these aspects, those aspects? That's not a great way of going about it, to be honest. I think what we should have done is design, 3 coherent versions and tell players which one of these would you like us to put to a poll, A, B, or C, and the winner gets put to a yes/no poll. What we did instead was describe all the various aspects they could have and see which combination players went for. Oh well, one learns.
I think without the trading post, though, we wouldn't have had the GE, because I remember the trading post coming out and people being skeptical, obviously, but it turned out that it was an idea that worked for the interim between player to player and GE trading, I think. And I mean, I even remember the GE when it was proposed, there was so many people who were so vehemently against it, but I don't think they would be saying the same thing now. Like you were saying earlier, it's the timing of it,
We didn't know whether the GE would pass or not, and I don't even know which I was hoping for. I mean, well, it was a fair bit of work, but what the heck? They pay me to do quite a bit of work anyway, and so yeah, I'll do a load of work, because if I weren't doing that, I'd program something else. But it did feel like a very big shift.
That was almost something else you said there.
Well, the effect it has on the game. A lot less player-to-player stuff. But at the time, the vocal end of the community wasn't interested in the community building soft stuff. They wanted to be able to trade a lot more things.
Yeah.
And, we could have said, no, we're not going to pull that. It's good for you to have player-to-player trading. So we're not going to offer you this thing. They probably wouldn't have stopped asking for it, just having been told that it wouldn't be good for them. And it would have been quite artificial for us to resist in that way, especially as we did have the infrastructure needed to deliver. So, no, polling it did make sense. And to my slight surprise, it passed.
I think for a lot of people, surprised it passed. It was just like Brexit in that sense.
Well, it passed with a fairly convincing supermajority.
It was 80-something or 90-something, wasn't it?
Something like it certainly got over 75.
Well, no, I remember. Yeah, you're right, because I remember it. Well, obviously you're right. Be weird if
if it got under 75, we wouldn't have shipped it.
Yeah, my brain for a second just didn't work. But no, I think it was the highest result, wasn't it, for a while? Because there was one recently, I can't even remember which one it was now, that flew past it. But
it might have been the biggest turnout.
I mean, it's definitely definitely, in my opinion, a good addition to the game.
I liked if we'd insisted on doing things like adding attacks to it at the time of launch. See, at the time we got some survey results said people didn't want one of those. That's the thing I think may have changed, because, well, players have gradually started realizing why cache syncs are important in a game.
Yeah.
What they really want is item syncs to go with it, but cache syncs are important too. And if we said you can only have a GE if you accept one that's got attacks in it, and see if they vote for that, then
yeah,
I mean, many would feel railroaded by saying, well, of course we had to accept that. It's not because we want the tax, it's because you said it's that or nothing. We chose it over nothing. And they would be right. It wouldn't have been a free and fair choice. On the other hand, we'd have given them a GE with a tax rather than nothing. Whereas now we're in a position where we may well go and do a GE tax, but I expect a very much stronger backlash after so much time of it being free.
Well, I mean, I think it would make sense to have one, but also I think because money making is so much more accessible, I think is probably the word I'd use for it. From an earlier start, as well as the fact that people are more attuned to the economy of the game now, that maybe there'd be a bit of an understanding at least.
There's certainly more interest in cash sinks than there was in those days. And there's also more vocal reminiscing about the days when people would meet each other. We've talked about community in this evening already, but if trading still involved meeting up with people occasionally, even if you're meeting up just to get around a GE tax, well, it's meeting people. Higher chance of being scammed, of course, but you know, there's ways of trying to avoid that. And if the GE did have a tax and people who didn't want to pay that tax were therefore encouraged to, well, left to meet face to face and trade directly, some feel it might get more community building.
I think so. I think it's a hard one because there's so many other ways now that people use to talk to players, like Discord, Twitch, Twitter. I wonder actually how people would respond to that. Like, I think the hardcore players and the longer time players would accept it and still use the GE just because the efficiency of their play, they can afford to lose a certain percentage of their income, be that, 2% or 5% or something along those lines.
Meeting people does take time.
Yeah, exactly. It's time is money in that case, I guess, where, waiting to trade with someone could take you 45 minutes for a specific item, whereas you sell it to GE, lose 10% of that profit. Within that 45 minutes, you'd make X amount more than the tax. So, yeah, I wonder. Actually, I wonder, is there a plan? Not a solid plan, as you say, because it's just the possibility of actually adding it is there now in the eyes of the company. Would you say that it's something that's been talked about in the office?
The idea of a tax is something that comes up from time to time. I do expect we may go ahead and put out a blog with some designs for how we could go about it and see what players say, maybe run a survey.
Okay, fair enough.
That's what I got before I cut out.
No worries. No, it's fine. I mean, I spent half an hour trying to work out how to record at the start, so I think you have every right. So I think that's pretty much all of the updates, bar the Zora poll, which was the first time that was polled in December of that year.
It was the fun thing I remember about that is we let players vote on the name of the thing. We programmed most of it under the name of Snake Boss because we didn't know what it was going to be called and didn't really care at the time. And we let players send in their suggestions for names for it. And once we removed all of the ones that were Nagini, Slytherin, Voldemort, and variations thereof, we were left with only a few left.
I mean, I think it was quite a good decision. It's a pretty amazing game. Pretty amazing name, sorry. So I guess that's pretty much all of the updates for that year that are sort of notable. I guess just thank you again for giving me your time, of course. And the last thing I wanted to ask was kind of a slightly more broad question and not really based around 2014, sort of more of a general question. Is there I guess a plan to after this pandemic is over, because I know you guys are running sort of mass community polls in person for a long period of not a long period of time, but for a fair amount of time before. Is that a plan to do more of a sit down in a room and have a chat to the actual players?
I would like to, not least which is it's easier. See, I think you get more out of players in that kind of room. Also, when they're in a room with each other, so they're not just talking to us and thinking, "Oh, don't want to say this to the JMods. Do want to say this to the JMods," but you stick a load of players in the room with each other and let them talk to each other about what ought to be done. maybe you get something out of that.
Definitely. I think it's a great thing, and I think there's not, again, another innovation of old school RuneScape doing that for not just content creators, but players in general. I mean, I got invited to one this time last year, I guess. Around that time, I couldn't make it, unfortunately, but yeah, it was a pretty awesome. And then obviously RuneFest this year is not going to be happening, but bring on next year, hopefully.
It feels like, I mean, for all we see, vaccines turning up as of apparently tomorrow in this country. If you're very, very old, it feels like it's still risky to book flights.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing where I hesitate to try organising an event until people can reliably get from any country to any other country, or at least from this country to any other country and vice versa. I think when the world gets back to that kind of state, then it becomes a bit safer to invite people to book tickets for stuff. But as it is, heck, I wouldn't even commit to going to Birmingham in the next 3 months because I have no idea what the restrictions will be like, and that's me just traveling across like 2 train rides in this country, let alone inviting people to spend 4-figure sums flying across the planet to see us, where we've got no idea what restrictions we might encounter or they might encounter.
And even if those restrictions are necessarily they're as competent as they should be.
Let's, regardless of how a restriction arose, if it's the kind of thing that might stop somebody getting to take up the 4-figure tickets they spent for their flights, or their hotel booking might get messed up, that's a huge risk we'd be asking them to take to come and see us.
Yeah. Well, just bring on the world getting back to normal. I think it's not to rush it, obviously, to do it properly, but I certainly miss in-person events.
As do I. I like RuneFest, and we're coming up on our 20th anniversary of RuneScape existing next year. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Even if the idea that we might have marked it with a massive international event is actually quite understandable. It's the kind of thing we might have loved to do, to say to the world, we've had this MMO for 20 years.
Which I believe is the longest, bar maybe EVE Online, but I don't even think EVE Online's been around for 20, has it?
I don't really know, but it's pretty darn good. I mean, there are computer games that celebrate bigger milestones. Mario's turned 40 or something. I don't know. But the received wisdom I was being told in 2006 was online role-playing games last 7 years. There's lots of data across the industry that shows they all go after 7 years. Therefore, we should be looking at what comes after RuneScape. And the answer appears to be another RuneScape.
And an older one.
Actually, we'll keep both of them at the same time, thank you. So, because for all I only focus on the old school one myself, I meet RS3 players and they are no less passionate. They care about their game just as old school players care about their game. There's not a lot of overlap between them. That's all right. But having 2 RuneScapes is great. And the idea of a third one, 2007 scape with no updates, that one comes up quite often as a request. And, sure, you split your community, you've got the risk of ending up with 2 dingy little communities that both die rather than one that has to compromise a lot but grows. But, old school worked.
Yeah.
The thing that is actually a sticking point is technology there. Because people assume you can just take the version you launched in 2013, dig it out of the archive, boot it up again, and it'll run. Sadly, that's not the case. If it were, then, that would be lovely. But in the intervening, coming up on 8 years, quite a few things have changed. Save games have changed. names have changed.
Flash is changing.
It's changed. Oh yeah. But basically, something that ran on your infrastructure 8 years ago doesn't necessarily run on your infrastructure right now if you boot it back up again. We need to get things rewritten. We need to have, as it was with no changes except those strictly necessary to make it run still.
Yeah.
And people would probably want to be able to pay with bonds, knowing the requests we tend to get. So I suspect we'd end up having to put quite a lot of dev time into that one, even once it was booted up in the first place. I do not think we're going to have the resources to offer another version of RuneScape not for a while yet.
Well, especially as well with the human resources side of things, you're not going to be able to keep up with, unless you hire more people, keep up with the updates that you're already putting into 07 to the same extent, because you're then splitting your forces.
Given that people say we don't want any staff, we want to be left alone because updates are evil, they don't need a lot of ongoing support to the same extent, although they would probably want their bugs fixed. And considering the feedback we've had about old school RuneScape, I wouldn't be surprised if they then also said, oh, you've got to fix this mechanic, you've got to fix that mechanic, you've got to fix this thing, because those are usability issues, you've got to fix those. Players might find that they want a little more than they expect to want. But on the other hand, I do think there's a legit case to be made for doing it.
Well, it's the same with 2010 Scape as well, because people are wanting that back,
Well, that's also understandable. Sadly, we never found a complete archive of that.
No.
I mean, I was never part of the searching for things, because searching our repository is not something they'd send me for, but the engineer team doing it at the time, who actually knew where things would have been archived to, and knew where all the backup tapes used to be kept, they were never able to find a complete version except for the August 2007 backup tape.
Turns out it's perfect time.
Well, 2.5 weeks later, we could have the God Wars.
Exactly.
But we got old school. I don't regret it, even if the interest in a 2010 or 2011 version would have been legit. It's not like, oh, players think they want that, but they don't really. No, they jolly well do want it, and we know why. We haven't got one.
Yeah, I mean, I am one of those players who would, if possible, and it isn't, unfortunately, love 2010 back, because I did enjoy, some of those changes, but at the same time, I guess the player almost expects the impossible to be possible, kind of at a click of a fingers anyway, because of how efficient your team is. Well, you as a team, I guess, not your team, but
some take the view that if only we understood how badly they wanted something, it would become possible. Like, take your interest in a 2010 Scape. I've just mentioned that we haven't actually got such an archive that anyone's ever managed to find. You tell some players that, and their view is, well, poll it, then you'll see how popular it is. And yeah, the thing we can't do doesn't really matter how popular it is, to be honest, because there's not a whole lot you could say. Frankly, somebody walked into my house and offered me £1 million to make it happen. I still couldn't make it happen. And I'd have to buy with his £1 million.
Well, you'd have to You'd have to rewrite it, wouldn't you? That's the only. But that would be absurd.
Well, there's rather a lot of it, and it wouldn't come out exactly the same if one did rewrite it. And the engine that ran it is not the version we have now that can support things like a mobile client. Basically, things have diverged, and trying to cobble one of those together is not going to come out quite like it was.
No.
There's a few things that we might genuinely want to do differently. Like, under the hood, the Slayer infrastructure in 2010 was kind of awkward.
That's an understatement, but yeah, it was.
We've been able to learn from things that were done before when rewriting old school Slayer system, so that we don't end up with that same kind of difficulty.
on that note, I am going to leave it here because
Okay.
I have to be up, as I say, 5 something or other.
Oh, well,
Thank
thanks
you.
for the chat, and
No,
I'm
no,
sure
don't
we'll
worry.
be in touch again.
Oh no, definitely. Hopefully, if we can, it'll be amazing. Quick thank you to everyone who watches this as well, who has shown such amazing support. You know, like a lot of people have watched it and just said they really enjoy it. They love listening to Ash, of course. Have said I've done quite a good job. I think they're wrong. I think it's mainly Ash, which is fine. I'm just here basically facilitating questions which aren't very well worded. But it's nice from a personal note from me for a second to kind of, I'm going to be that guy. But I've been trying to make content myself for, I guess, 10 years now. God, I'm old. But I've always done it in such a selfish way where I thought, oh, I must do it myself. But actually having someone else involved like Ash, because obviously this was only going to start out as an audio um idea for uni, but having someone else involved who I admire, would consider a friend, etc., it has really facilitated that, and everyone's responses have as well. So for a very personal and selfish note, thank you for indulging me, I guess.
Well, thanks for inviting me on, and I do hope you feel free to try my colleagues as well. Um, especially as my perspective on how things were will not be the only one,
Mm.
and there's other sides to the stories that people might love hearing at some point.
I reckon we'll get to 2020 first with the updates, and then we'll see where we go. I mean, it would be lovely to have, if I can. I will ask 1 or 2 people, colleagues wise, because it'd be cool to have, like, almost as people join, to see if they could come on like year by year. I mean, I've got Alfie as a contact if he's about. I don't know if he would be, but that could be quite interesting.
Well, I wish you a very good night now, and thanks
Thank you.
again. So
No,
thanks for listening.